London, a city of tradition and innovation. And at its heart, a war museum with secrets dark and strange. A tortured spy, a gun silenced by science, a nuclear nightmare, and the near-death experience of Winston Churchill. Secrets hidden in plain sight inside the Imperial War Museum. Down a garden path guarded by naval artillery is London's Imperial War Museum, dedicated to the history of Britain at war, from World War I to the present. Since the museum was founded in 1917, its collection has grown to more than 500,000 objects, exhibited in 5 locations across England. Here, in the shadow of the Parliament buildings, there is a branch of the museum that is completely below street level. Why would anyone build a museum underground? In 1940, Adolf Hitler threatened England with invasion. British forces were vastly outnumbered. Britain's best asset was her Prime Minister, Winston Churchill. He was a brilliant strategist and morale booster, and Hitler knew it. Hitler targeted Churchill for assassination. And when his warplanes pounded London in the Blitz, Number 10 Downing Street became an unsafe place for Churchill to live. And that brings us back here. The museum, called the Churchill War Rooms, was originally an underground bunker. During World War II, its location was top secret.
I think the thing that really hits you when you're here is that this was such a secret location, right in the heart of London, where there's crowds of people passing nearby within a stone's throw, quite literally, of the core of government in war. And they wouldn't have known it existed. They wouldn't have known anything about it.
At the foot of these stairs, we'll discover how the British people ensured the safety of their irreplaceable leader. It's a secret that's stranger than you might think. Here we enter a wartime nerve center, frozen in time. These strategic maps are the ones Churchill used. This phone is the one he used to speak to Air Defense Command. And this was a favorite brand of Cuban cigar. Around this table, as bombs rained down above, Churchill met with his chiefs of staff.
Invasion could happen any day. He's faced with his chiefs of staff bang opposite him, who to him never seemed to be doing things quite as he wanted them to be done. They never seemed to be doing them fast enough. And this is Churchill's chair. You can see on it where Churchill basically banged it constantly with his signet ring on his right hand. And on this side, incredibly, scratched it with his fingernails to the point it really made an indentation in the woodwork. You can hear and feel the bombs dropping outside. It would be an intense time. And you know that you're absolutely up against it, with your backs to the walls.
After late-night meetings, Winston's staff urged him to sleep in this room. But he hated hiding from Hitler in a hole. He complained that the bunker had a bad smell, and he chafed at his staff's insistence that his bodyguards sleep down here too.
Churchill was a man who was a very reluctant subterranean, if you like, and it was only really the extreme of the bombing raids that drove him down here.
As the nightly bombing raids got ever bigger, Churchill's staff worried the bunker wouldn't protect him. Engineers designed reinforcements hidden in the existing structure of the building overhead.
Here you can see where they put the slab in for his area to make sure he was protected, at least. Has anybody ever estimated how much concrete is in there, in tonnage terms?
A lot.
But no bunker can protect a leader who won't stay inside. Often, after heavy raids, Churchill wanted a street-level view of the devastation. And he wanted to be with his people in their darkest hours. In photographs like these, you will often see this man lurking in the shadows. This is Churchill's 24/7 bodyguard, Inspector Walter Thompson. He had a tough assignment, and not just because of Nazi assassins.
The trouble with Churchill was he probably had very little concept of personal danger. He was a huge risk taker. Now, you can imagine trying to protect someone like that. It's almost like having a dog that constantly runs off the leash.
When Inspector Thompson was sleeping, Churchill would sometimes slip out of the bunker alone for some fresh air in St. James Park. This kind of risky behavior gave his bodyguard nightmares. As German bombs got bigger, Churchill's engineers had nightmares too.
Do you think it would have withstood direct hit for a 500-pounder?
Generally, anything bigger than a 500-pound bomb was going to devastate. The shock transmitted through to anybody inside would have been fatal.
Cause of death would have been asphyxiation, as the shock wave sucked out all the oxygen. During the worst air raids, Churchill had the option to descend to a deeper, safer level, to take refuge behind airtight doors.
You can tell we're in the sub-basement because there's not much room.
Absolutely, yeah. The mind your head is everywhere down here, isn't it?
It's a steel frame, steel door with a rubber seal around the edge. The steel sheet is, well, roughly 10 mil thick. That's going to stop quite a lot.
Yeah.
But instead of descending here, Churchill often went the other way. In an air raid, there is no place less safe than the roof. But that is where Churchill wanted to go.
This is where Churchill used to come to get his overview of what was going on in London. He could see the whole of the city from here. The good Inspector Thompson would have made every effort he could to stop Churchill coming up here and being in such danger, in such harm's way. But he couldn't stop him, and he was Prime Minister and he was Churchill. You know, he did things like change the locks. He tried to get Mrs. Churchill, persuade him to stop him and everything, and nobody could stop Churchill. Nothing could. From up here, you could have the impression that the whole city was on fire and see the flames. You could smell the smoke. The planes probably would have attacked from that vantage point over there because they'd be coming basically straight at him. And they'd be bombing strategic points like the power station over there. And he'd see all that from up here. This is where he really got a sense of what it was about in a way. This is where he'd quietly contemplated it all, puffing on a cigar, sipping on a whiskey, and wondering how long it would be before it was all over, probably.
On May 10th, 1941, the last Nazi bomb fell on London. The Blitz was over. And soon Britain and her allies would go on the offensive. In the struggle that followed, Churchill's bold strategies often helped win the day. He prevailed because he took risks in battle, just as he did in his own life. And as for the secret of ensuring the safety of an irreplaceable leader, perhaps it simply can't be done. Because those who play it safe don't win wars. Next on Museum Secrets, what it takes to stay cool at Mach 1 over enemy territory. An hour's drive north of London, near the sleepy village of Duxford, is the largest branch of the Imperial War Museum. Within a complex of many buildings is the world's most beautiful airplane hangar. Inside, history hangs suspended in the air. From this World War I Spad fighter to this Tornado jet. These planes are here because they went to war and came back in one piece, along with the pilots who flew them. What does it take to fly into battle and survive? That's our museum secret.
Ah, Shifty. It's a long time since we've seen one of these.
I know. It really brings back memories, doesn't it, I suppose?
Les Hendry and Simon Shifty Young know tornado jets better than anyone.
I haven't been up close to a tornado for the best part of 10 to 12 years. And instantly I know exactly what to check, where to look. It's just exactly the same.
Today, they don't look much like warriors.
Which is a separate little...
But in January 1991, Les was a senior engineer and Shifty a Top Gun pilot, with orders to travel to Saudi Arabia and prepare for battle. Several months before, Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait, laying claim to the country's rich oil fields. A United Nations coalition prepared to counterattack. US and British forces assembled on land and sea, determined to drive Saddam out of Kuwait. The Tornado Squadron was tasked with a dangerous mission: destroy Iraq's largest airfield to prevent Saddam's fighters from taking to the air. They'd be going in while Iraqi air defenses were still intact.
We were going into the unknown, and there was a tension there, but nobody talked about it.
The weapon chosen for the attack was the JP-233, a heavy cluster bomb specifically designed to destroy runways.
These things were very smart. They would blast a hole through very thick runway concrete and then create an explosion underneath the concrete to heave it upwards. Very difficult to repair when concrete heaves upwards.
Delivering these bombs would require a sturdy jet that could fly fast and low over the enemy airfield. Based on its proven abilities, strategists decided the Tornado was the best plane for the job. It could fly 650 miles an hour as low as 150 feet above the ground. In the early hours of January 17, 1991, 8 Tornadoes from Les and Shifty's squadron idled on a desert tarmac, ready for battle.
Leading up to the takeoff was very much just like a normal training night, but with an edge. And that edge was, that we were going to do a combat for real.
Shifty's Tornado Squadron was a small part of a much larger armada.
It's an image that will stay with me for as long as I live. There were just thousands of aircraft in the sky at the same time, all orchestrated like a huge, great big ballet.
As the Tornado Squadron reached Iraqi airspace, they dropped below radar range.
I'd be alive to say there wouldn't be an element of fear, but you're just doing what you've been trained to do. Fly low, fly on time, fly accurately. And now, I have to be honest, now the tension really is in the cockpit. I could feel it. My navigator could feel it. And then we delivered the weapons. It was almost like having a huge spotlight suddenly lit up underneath the aircraft. I'm only at about 160, 180 feet. I can see the ground very clearly. I can see the runway has. I can even see people very, very clearly. The next thing I remember is the noise and the vibration on the aircraft. And it just suddenly pitches up. And you suddenly find yourself, I'm not at 200 feet above the runway anymore. I'm actually at 1,500 feet over an airfield. They have missiles, they're firing. I don't want to be here. And bluntly, it's about survival. It's about making sure you and your aircraft, your navigator, do the right thing, survive. By the time we're flying back at about 5 in the morning, the sun is beginning to emerge on the horizon. It was a nice sunrise.
Saddam's runways were destroyed. The squadron had accomplished its mission.
There's lots of handshakes, pats on the back. Shifty's a big hugger, so there was hugs going on, and it was just good to get the 8 of them back safely.
So what does it take to fly into battle and survive?
Yeah, fear's there, but when you're delivering the weapons, you have a job to do. That concentrates the mind, pushes those fear things out. You can't simulate it, you can't practice for it, you can't even mentally prepare for it. It just happens and you deal with it.
And as for the sturdy Tornado that brought them back alive, these Top Guns are not afraid to show a little appreciation. Next on Museum Secrets, how a beautiful spy withstood Nazi torture. The Imperial War Museum is filled with heavy metal and tales of men of steel. And then there's this.
Almost all visitors will stop and look at these objects because they're not the kind of things you would immediately associate with the Imperial War Museum.
But as we'll see, these dolls have every right to be here. The reason why is a museum secret. In the summer of 1941, World War II was entering its 3rd year. France had been occupied by Germany since June of 1940. Allied forces were desperate to reclaim the critical French coastline and launch an invasion from the sea. Between May and August of that year, more than 400 special British agents were sent into occupied France. Their mission was to encourage and facilitate espionage, sabotage, and reconnaissance behind enemy lines. To support these efforts, the British Admiralty asked the public to send in any snapshots they might have of the French coast. A French housewife living in London was sure she could help. Odette Sanson sent in photos from her childhood in France. But she sent them to the War Office by mistake. When War Office intelligence officers saw Odette's letter, they immediately realized she would be perfect for espionage in France. She'd spent her childhood there. She knew the language and the landscape. When Odette was asked to become a spy, she decided to take on the mission.
Her mother was still living in France. Her father had been killed in 1918 towards the end of the First World War. She'd been brought up in the expectation that the Germans would come again, and her time would come when she would have to do the right thing by France.
Agent Odette was equipped with basic training, a gun, and a cyanide pill. She wasn't equipped to say goodbye.
It was an incredibly difficult decision for Odette to leave her 3 young daughters behind in the UK. She put them in a boarding school. She wrote lots of letters which could be posted at regular intervals. She set it all up, and then she went away.
In November 1942, Odette arrived in occupied France. Operating under the code name Lise, Odette's mission was to courier messages to and from the French resistance. 6 months into her mission, Odette was betrayed by a double agent and arrested by the Gestapo.
When she's going to be interrogated by the Gestapo for the first time, she goes into the office where most people will be absolutely terrified, and there's no doubt she was frightened. She walks in tall, holding her head up high. It's not aggressive, it's just very determined that when she comes across these agents of evil, she's going to beat them.
The Gestapo wanted the names of resistance fighters. Odette refused to answer. They bared her back and applied a red-hot iron.
When they were applying the heat, what she said is they made a mistake because they faced me with the window. And so when the pain was coming, she looked out of the window and focused on the leaves and the trees and the movement and the greenery. And what she did is she projected out of her mind a sense of the episodes in life that kept her happy.
The interrogators pulled out her toenails one by one.
What she actually said about that is that she left Britain with a broken heart. She left behind everybody she loved, and from then on it was just a case of physical pain, and she could deal with it.
As a member of a forced labor detail, Odette was ordered to mend Nazi uniforms. But she refused. Instead, she began to sew something else.
So she was effectively rubbing the nose of the Germans in the fact that she was doing what she wanted on her terms when she wanted to do it. I think it's very possible that her separation from her own children was part of the reason why she wanted to make something for children.
Throughout her ordeal, Odette steadfastly refused to reveal any names or secrets. Fed up with her refusal to cooperate, the Nazis sent her to Ravensbrück concentration camp. Even here, Odette endured. Later, when asked why she didn't take her cyanide pill, Odette said she couldn't give up on living, as long as there was the smallest chance of seeing her children again. But on May 1st, 1945, when a guard ordered Odette out of her cell at gunpoint, she was sure her life was over. What Odette didn't know was that the Nazis were on the verge of defeat. The camp commandant was hoping to trade Odette for lenient treatment for himself. But Odette exposed the commandant to the Americans and demanded his arrest. In a final act of defiance, she ordered him to surrender his gun.
Even at that point, starving, bedraggled, she is so superior that Fritzeren picks up his pistol and gives it to her. There is this small little woman who triumphs over this agent of evil.
Free at last, Odette returned to England to reunite with her children.
How did you feel when you were away from the children for so long, Mrs. Sanson?
Oh, I think this is almost impossible to explain. Only a mother would understand.
Eventually, her dolls returned to England too, displayed with pride by the Imperial War Museum in a room filled with Britain's highest medals of valor. This one's a George Cross. Odette was the first woman to receive it.
And she always was quite clear that the George Cross which she received was not really for her. It was for all of the women who went as agents undercover, and she was simply the person who lived to take the recognition for all of them.
Odette wasn't made of steel, but she had iron in her soul. Next on Museum Secrets, how a scientific soldier silenced the Kaiser's big guns. The Imperial War Museum was not founded during an era of peace, but in the midst of a tumultuous conflict. The year was 1917, the bloodiest year of the First World War. Britain and her allies were locked in a fierce struggle with Germany that would claim millions of lives. Today, in a graveyard in Duxford, a few of the English war dead lie buried, not far from the museum that displays the weapon that may have taken their lives. The German FK-16.
Despite what we might imagine about the Great War, the big killer in the conflict is not the machine gun. It certainly isn't the rifle. It's not grenades. It's this. It's the artillery. People are mortally terrified of artillery because, unlike a bullet, normally a single wound, shell fragmentation could simply tear men to pieces. And what I've got here is a standard shell of the Great War. Millions of these were fired by the 18-pounder field gun. This is going to send out over 360 metallic balls capable of piercing, well, flesh and blood.
Worse yet, the FK-16 could fire 5 rounds a minute and strike from as far away as 10 kilometers.
This field represents an area behind the Allied lines. If you can imagine that over that hill there are the German gun positions, somewhere in the middle distance is going to be no man's land with its trenches on both sides, and we're in the area where actually you'd have British guns and positions.
The German guns were invisible behind their lines. Until a way could be found to pinpoint and destroy them, Allied infantry would be cut down, and the war could not be won. Spotting planes were sometimes sent to locate German batteries, but planes were vulnerable to enemy fire. And the traditional method of spotting artillery by eye was ineffective in bad weather, or when German guns were far away. As an experiment, Allied engineers began exploring a new idea. They attempted to use the sound of a gun to calculate its position.
That allows you to then direct your artillery onto the enemy. You don't have to see them. All you've got to be able to do is hear them and do the calculations.
But the battlefield was a noisy place. No existing microphone could isolate the sound of a single gun. The Allies were going to need an entirely new technology to pinpoint and destroy the deadly German artillery. To hunt for the secret, the British Army turned to a 25-year-old soldier named Lawrence Bragg, the youngest person to win the Nobel Prize in Physics. To demonstrate Bragg's work in the field, we've assembled some of the items he used. And we're going to get some help from scientist William Vanderkloot.
So what I've done, Bill, is I've brought these things along.
Lovely.
I thought that was the most important bit.
Well, certainly.
Okay, rum jar complete with the wire on top, which is useful. Some nice period cable, although not. And then, vitally important bit of equipment, the mallet for knocking the stakes in. I mean, I think they use an ammunition box, but I'm using a ration box.
Good.
Bragg chose these objects because of an inspiration that came to him in an unlikely location. He noticed that when German artillery boomed in the distance, his bottom would elevate slightly off the seat. He realized that on the noisy battlefield, only the biggest guns create this kind of jarring subsonic shockwave. Bragg shared his discovery with a member of his team, Corporal William Tucker. Tucker decided to try to build a shockwave detector. Tucker connected a rum jar, some thin wire, and a recording device. The idea is that when a big gun fires, the shock wave causes a gust of air to move over the top of the rum jar, sending an impulse to the recording device where the precise time of the impulse is registered. The crude shockwave detector worked.
It's the movement of air that's doing it, so it's the hot wire Tucker microphone.
Got it. Got it. You're in charge of staples, then?
Bragg refined the device by replacing the rum jar with an ammunition box.
Well, should we just make holes in the box then, in that case, and get those in place? That's through. Okay, that's good. Okay, that's gone through. Okay, is that right, Bill?
Yes, perfect.
And then the lid goes back on again, because we're now using the whole wire, aren't we?
Right.
As I think. If I hold
This
the end of
second-generation shockwave detector worked even better than the first.
Okay, we should have an exposed
But Bragg knew one shockwave detector would not be enough. To triangulate on the German guns, he built several detectors, placed them at equal distances apart, and connected them by a long run of wire to the shockwave recorder. Would this system perform with the accuracy required to pinpoint the location of German artillery? The answer would come on a battlefield in Amiens, France, on the morning of August 8, 1918. Fog rolled in, preventing the Allies from pinpointing German artillery by eye. But the fog was not all bad news. The heavy mist meant that the Germans couldn't see what the Allies were up to either. If they had, they might have wondered why some soldiers were stringing wire. As Allied infantry go over the top and German artillery fires to cut them down, Bragg's men turn on the shockwave detectors. From each German gun, a shockwave radiates outward, striking each detector at a slightly different time. The impulses are sent through the wires to the shockwave recorder, which registers the time differences precisely. Using a complex formula devised by Bragg, his men use the time differences to triangulate the positions of the German guns. If they are even a fraction out, the Allied gunners will miss their targets, and the German guns will slaughter the advancing infantry. But as the coordinates are relayed to the Allied gunners, and they fire toward the German lines, one by one, the German guns fall silent. Allied forces advance with surprisingly little resistance, right past the smoking wreckage of German artillery.
The Battle of Amiens is the beginning of the end for the German army. For the next 100 days, the next 3 months, the German army is on the back foot, retreating, 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 until the 11th of November. What sound ranging does is it brings about a whole era of technology, science applied to warfare. In future, you can now kill opponents you can't see. This is an amazing leap forward in warfare.
Lawrence Bragg and William Tucker had changed the nature of war forever. Up next, the secret of hiding in plain sight. Inside the Imperial War Museum are some of history's most powerful weapons. Often, victory goes to the side with the biggest guns. But sometimes, wars are won by cunning and deception. In this building, not accessible to the public, are some of the sneakiest weapons ever made. In each box is an attempt to discover an elusive secret: how to make a soldier invisible.
Well, this is a hand-improvised sniper's robe of the sort used by the British Army in the First World War. And it comprises of a cotton loose-fitting robe, a button-over hood and mask with apertures to the mouth and to the eyes, and improvised and hand-painted by the soldier that wore it. Even on the quietest of days, 18 men of any battalion could be taken out of action by snipers. So they were very, very effective. In this case, he's actually sewn some organic material as well as overpainted it, very much to his own design and taste. This is a remarkable and unique object in the museum's collection. These are extremely rare.
After World War I, the German army provided camouflage for all its troops. using science to mimic nature.
The fellows that designed and developed it were artists. So they looked at the plane tree, for example, they looked at the tree bark. And when you look at some German uniforms of that period, you can see that kind of influence. You can see how that design developed.
Since World War II, the changing patterns reveal how conflict zones have moved around the globe. From snowy Russia, to the jungles of Vietnam, to the deserts of the Middle East.
Camouflage itself goes back many, many centuries, back to primeval days. When man was hunting for food, he had to act like an animal so that he could stalk his prey to eat.
Though any of these patterns might prevent the hunter from becoming the hunted, none provide complete invisibility. And so designers keep trying new ideas.
I've got to say, one of my all-time favorites, it's lasted 40 years. The scientific advancement of this is that it had this almost dazzle effect to the eyes and to the brain. This caused confusion, which is another element of camouflage and concealment. Confusion, deception.
But recently, even this cunning camouflage has become obsolete. To see why, we've come to a British Army science facility where Lieutenant Colonel Toby Evans is testing an updated version.
Afghanistan is what really concentrated our mind on this, because people were operating from pure desert into the green zone and back again in one patrol. And clearly there's no way you can change your clothing in the middle of a patrol.
Evans hopes the Army's new multi-terrain pattern will solve this problem.
What we're looking for here today is two soldiers, one wearing the old woodland pattern camouflage that we used to issue as standard in this part of the world, and one wearing the new multi-terrain pattern camouflage that you can see me wearing here.
Two soldiers are hidden in this field. One in the old camouflage, one in the new. So far, so good. Neither can be seen.
Okay, guys, if we stand up. The woodland camouflage only blends in well to its own background. It goes very dark if you see it at any distance, and the eye is drawn to areas of shadow. The multi-terrain pattern has some high and some low contrast, which causes the eye to bounce off it as being, there's nothing for me to look at there, it's not a threat.
But even the new camouflage won't provide protection if a soldier can't wear it in extreme heat.
3, 2, 1.
Scientists use this enviro chamber to simulate the 40-degree temperatures of the Middle East. Evans and research scientist Renee Navola monitor the soldier's heart rate and condition.
So overall, we can see how hot this person's getting, how hard they're working, whether they're comfortable, and what the effect of that clothing system actually is on him.
If we don't know what this is going to do to the guy's thermal burden, then we could end up with more people going down with heat exhaustion.
And even normal body heat could make this soldier's body visible to an enemy equipped with thermal imaging goggles. So new uniforms are impregnated with anti-infrared dye. But even that would not be enough to camouflage the soldier on today's battlefield.
Every soldier now carries a radio, so that's giving away a signal. Every soldier probably has a GPS attached to him, so that's constantly signaling to a satellite. The real challenge in the next 10 years is going to be to mask all that sort of signals. So we have to make sure that all camouflage that we are working on is camouflage not only in the visible spectrum, but in the near-infrared and in every other spectrum that is likely to become a problem in the foreseeable future.
We've seen Predator. That ability to make the person or the garments or the weapon system, the vehicle, maybe the aircraft or even the battleship, to make those invisible, I'm sure that's just around the corner. But from a curatorial point of view, that would be an absolute nightmare, because how would I ever find it?
Next on Museum Secrets, a very British nuclear nightmare. The Imperial War Museum exhibits many weapons designed to strike fear into the hearts of the enemy. But there is one that stands alone, above all the others, as it creates its mushroom cloud. The atomic bomb dropped on Japan in 1945 ushered in a terrifying nuclear age. At first, only the USA had the bomb. Then Britain and the Soviet Union joined the club. And that's when the world went mad, as in MAD, for mutual assured destruction. Weapons like this were kept ready for instant launch on both sides of the Iron Curtain, poised to level cities and spread clouds of poisonous radiation. Britain's armed forces stood ready in radar installations, bombers, and submarines. Civilians practiced running for shelter when they heard the air raid siren. And then there's this man, Neville Cullingford. By day, Neville worked in an office, but he had another secret job as a civil defense volunteer in the Royal Observer Corps. Until recently, his Cold War mission was classified. It was part of Britain's secret civil defense plan. Few knew the plan existed until Freedom of Information legislation forced its release, years after the Cold War ended. Why the civil defense plan was hidden from the British people is our final museum secret.
I'd get a phone call from it would be the group commandant in my case, to man up the group. And then it would be my responsibility to alert my 4 chief observers who were in charge of the 4 posts that I managed.
After alerting others, Neville would race here, one of many secret bunkers scattered throughout Britain.
And it was quite exciting times and that sort of thing as well, you know, because it was something that none of my work colleagues knew anything about. I just said that if I disappear out the door, I shan't say where I'm going, and you may not see me for a while.
Descending 6 meters underground, Neville and his fellow volunteers prepared their bunker for war.
They get it totally ready, and then they would be informed by a code word whether it was real, you know, there really was a nuclear attack on the way, or whether in fact it was an exercise.
Today, Neville has returned to a bunker in the company of historian Matthew Grant, one of few people who has studied the recently declassified civil defense plan.
There would have been a dozen or more of these around the country. The Royal Observer Corps were part of a wider network where they could monitor radioactive fallout and warn people if that was coming.
Yeah, right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, indeed. Yes.
Matthew hopes Neville can show him exactly how the fallout warning system was supposed to work.
Equipment we had in the post basically was the bomb power indicator.
So what would it mean if you flash up to 20 on the scale? What would that mean?
Well, it could mean that a nuclear weapon has been detonated.
So that dial shooting up would be the first indicator that there was been an attack on the country for you in your bunker?
It would indeed be, yes.
60 seconds after the first shockwave, a volunteer was expected to go outside to assess the radiation.
So now we're at the top of this bunker. What's this white cylinder here?
Right, that's a ground zero indicator. Right, so he would unscrew the lid, and this, you can see there are 4 pinhole cameras. Each of those corresponds with a cardinal compass point, and against each cardinal compass point, there's a photosensitive paper in each of these cassettes. Number 1 observer would take them each in turn, and for instance, in this one, the size of the spot would tell you how powerful the weapon was.
Atomic explosions that touch the ground cause radioactive fallout. A spot low on the paper would indicate that an explosion had touched the ground and radiation was on its way. That would be Neville's cue to fire warning flares, if he had not already succumbed to acute radiation poisoning.
The whole system was very fragile, and it was always very debatable whether it would have worked.
The Civil Defense Plan predicted that nuclear war would kill nearly half of Britain's population and cause a complete societal collapse. But the British people were told something quite different. Government films told the British people they would survive if they employed the same pluck and determination that had helped them survive the Blitz.
We've been a big part of saving lives in the Second World War. The problem is defending Britain from attack by the Luftwaffe and defending it from nuclear weapons was very different.
In government films, this kind of real nuclear blast footage was never shown. The long-term effects of radiation weren't shown either.
The radiation is at its greatest intensity during the first 2 days, but the danger decreases rapidly as time passes.
They downplayed the extent of radiation. Sometimes they downplayed the nature of the blast to make people feel that it was less dangerous than it was.
Neville is well aware of this, but he still believes that all civil defense efforts were vital.
In some people's view, it may not have been adequate or necessary, but we were doing something practical, something we thought was important.
It was hoped that having a defense plan would prevent scenes like this.
One of their fears was that if people panicked, what this might actually do was encourage the Russians to press harder, which might actually end up causing the war that the people who were panicking wanted to avert.
Finally, this is the all clear. It means that there is no further threat of air attack or fallout, and that you can leave your place of shelter.
It was a facade, and yes, they lied. But they lied for what they thought were grander motives that were designed to ensure that British security was maintained and in the face of a menacing enemy.
And so the final secret may be that lying to an entire nation is sometimes the right thing to do. Perhaps when faced with the madness of nuclear war, we just can't handle the truth. This vast museum bears witness to the power of a nation and its greatest sorrows. For every secret we reveal, far more must remain unspoken. Soaring high above our heads, buried deep beneath the ground, hidden in plain sight, inside the Imperial War Museum.